Hello again, my little Volksgrenadiers, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. Today's episode is a tournament after action report. That's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. And oh boy, do I have a spicy meatball for your viewing pleasure, as I took my Germans to a tournament for the first time in Bolt Action 3rd edition. And I can assure you that there were terrible lows and incredible highs during this event. But throughout the whole thing, there was a lot of fun being had. And so without further ado, let's not mess around. Let's see how the Germans did and dive right into today's episode. You there, guardsmen! Do you like multi-part plastic sci-fi infantry that doesn't cost a kidney? Well, good news! The Mordian Glory channel is now officially sponsored by Wargames Atlantic. Wargames Atlantic sells fantastic sci-fi models which are perfect as alternative Imperial Guardsmen. This includes the Bulldogs, totally not Praetorians, or the Legrognards, which are totally not Mordians, Vestorians, or Kriegers, all in one box. And the best bit is, Wargames Atlantic offers a bulk buy discount, and the more you buy, the bigger the discount. Perfect for amassing those huge platoons of guardsmen. So what are you waiting, you fool? Click on the affiliate link down below, get yourself some great models, and support the channel today. As is tradition, I want to start off by saying a few thank yous. First off, I want to say a big thank you to the tournament organizer, Dan. He put on a really good event, and I really enjoyed it. I also want to say a big thank you to the venue for the event, Element Games. You guys know them, you guys love them. Anytime you go to Element, you know you're going to have a good experience. And lastly, I want to say a huge thank you to all of my opponents. I had 3 incredible games, and wargaming is very much a social thing, and it comes down to your opponent to make sure that you're going to have a good experience. And I can say without a doubt that this event was fantastic, and a big part of that was the people that I got to play. But with all of that said, now let's get into the video proper, and we'll begin with a look at the list. As per usual, I have made a separate video going through the nitty-gritty details of my army list, and I'll make sure there's a link to that down in the description below. But of course, I will give you guys a quick rundown now. I was running 4 platoons in this army, and I had a total of 16 order dice. My first platoon was a rifle platoon, and it consisted of 1 inexperienced officer, 2 6-man squads of regular German grenadiers with 2 LMGs in each squad. I then had 2 units of inexperienced infantry, 8-man strong, with 5 assault rifles in each squad. This was to represent my Volt Grenadiers. I then had a 2nd rifle platoon, this time an elite Fallschirmjäger force, and I had an officer with an extra man. I had 2 5-man squads of Fallschirmjäger. The first one had 4 assault rifles and an SMG, and the second one had 2 assault rifles, an SMG, and 2 rifles. All of those guys were piled inside of a regular truck. My 3rd platoon was a heavy weapons platoon with 3 mortars, all upgraded to medium mortars, with 2 of them having spotters, and the whole thing being led by another inexperienced officer. Last but not least, I had the armored platoon. Of course, got to bring a few panzers in a German army. Starting off, we had the command tank. This was an early war Panzer III upgraded with the medium anti-tank gun. And then I had another early war Panzer III upgraded with a medium anti-tank gun. When you're looking at the pictures, if you're trying to work out which Panzer III is the command tank, that's the one with all of the extra gubbin strapped to it and the Schützen side armor. It wasn't being run with side armor. It was just there. I was just using that model so that it was easy for my opponent to differentiate between the 2 Panzer IIIs. The last model in the army and the army platoon was the Marder III. This is the greatest, stupidest tank in Bolt Action for the Germans right now. I absolutely love it. It's armor 7, so it's utterly paper thin. It's open top, so even rifles can start pinning out, but it comes with a heavy anti-tank gun, and it is dirt cheap. In fact, all of these vehicles are fairly cheap, and when you average it out, they came to about 155 points per armored vehicle, which is an absolute steal. But with the list covered, now we need to get into the lay of the land. The format for the event was 1 day, 3 rounds. It was a 1250 points limit. There was a limit of 18 order dice and 4 platoons. Overall, I think the balance of the terrain was really good at this event. I never felt like it was so dense it was stifling the tournament, but I never felt it was so light that it was causing things to be hyper lethal. I want to give credit to Dan. I think he got the terrain bob on. However, it is important to note that the terrain was not really symmetrical, so there were some sides that were better than others, but that's just the nature of bot action, and many people who play the game consider that to be a feature, not a bug. In terms of its competitiveness, I would describe this as semi-competitive. There was definitely more of a social, let's have fun aspect to the whole thing. A lot of people at the tournament knew each other. A lot of people from the local bot action scene were playing at the event. And so there was a lot of chatting and chin wagging going on. People had put their best foot forward and tried to create the best list they could from their collections, but it didn't feel like, outside of 1 or 2 exceptions, that there was anyone bringing something super duper cheesy or super duper soft. Just a lot of people with their armies, rolling some dice and just trying to win some games. To sum it up in one sentence, this was your classic local tournament. And a small side note, my attitude going into this tournament was very relaxed. I didn't care if I lost every single game. I could have gone 0-3 and come out with a big grin on my face. I was just happy to be playing lots of bot action, and this is very much the game that I play as a palate cleanser for other more competitive games that I also do on the channel. So I was just here to have fun, and I can tell you guys, that mission was accomplished. But with all of that said, now let's get to the real reason you're all here. Let's get into the games. Battle number 1 was against Simon and his Americans. Simon and I are actually really good mates. We've played against each other a few times, and we always seem to get paired into each other at the tournaments. It's been about 3 months since I last got the chance to play him, so it was a great way to start the tournament. From what I can remember, in his list, he had a Sherman, and it was the early war version, so it set on fire and had thin sides, and he also had the M20 scout car. There was then 3 units of infantry, 1 equipped all with rifles, 1 equipped with a mixture of rifles and SMGs, and then 1 small squad with just a single LMG in there. There was also a light howitzer, a light mortar, and a medium mortar. Rounding the list out, we had a number of support teams, 2 bazooka teams, 1 medium machine gun, and then there were 3 officer teams, each one with an officer and 2 extra men. This was kind of cool because they all had rifles, so they all got an extra shot from the US special rules. And then there was an air observer also who had 2 extra guys, all with rifles, and of course, being Americans, he could call in 2 airstrikes. The mission for round 1 was just straight up kill each other. For each unit that you destroyed, you got 1 point, and you had to win the game by at least 2 points in order for it to be a victory. Deployment was on the long table edges, and you could put up to half of your army in reserve if you wanted to. I decided to put nothing of my army in reserve, and Simon decided to put 1 of his bazooka teams in reserve. For my deployment, on the right flank, I had my mortar pit with the Marder 3. In the center, I had my 2 LMG squads with an officer, and then on the left flank, I overloaded a bit with both Panzer IIIs, both units of Volksgrenadiers, and the bang bus full of the Fallschirmjäger. For the American deployment, we had an MMG, the air observer, a bazooka team, and an officer on the left flank. In the middle, we had 2 big units of infantry, the mortars and the scout car, and another officer. And then on the right flank, we had the Sherman, the small squad with an LMG, the howitzer, and another officer team. With everything deployed or in reserve, it was time to start pulling dice out of the bag. Now, bot action is a pseudo-alter activation game, and that can make it a little bit tricky and a little confusing if I try and describe things like then this unit moved here, but then the American unit moved here. So what I'm going to do is simply break things down into 3 sectors. Each turn, we're going to talk about the left flank, the middle, and the right flank, and I'll give you a summary of what happened in each one of these sectors each turn. Hopefully, that'll make it a little bit clearer and a little bit easier for you guys to follow along. So starting off with the left flank, the Germans go aggressive from the get-go. I push forward with my Fallschirmjäger in the truck, and I actually jump out and start laying down firepower, really enjoying the 18-inch range of my assault rifles, and I'm able to take off 2 out of 3 wounds from the MMG team. I also push forward with the Volksgrenadiers, but they're not quite in range. Just a few pot shots from the rifles going wide because they are inexperienced. And then I fired both of my Panzer IIIs at the scout car. It unfortunately couldn't recce because it had already moved, and I do manage to immobilize it and also stun it, so it does end up just being stuck out there in the open. As for the Americans, they desperately try and hold the Germans back, and the air observer begins to call in the first airstrike on the left flank. Likewise, in the middle, the Germans seize the initiative, and between the 2 double LMG squads, we are actually able to mow down the light howitzer of the Americans. That 36-inch range, plus not needing to worry about long-range penalties anymore, made these squads absolutely lethal. On the right flank, the Germans were not as successful. The Marder was struggling to find any targets, and I didn't want to make the first move because the enemy Sherman would definitely kill me because the Marder's so light armored. And my mortars tried to do a big triple bombardment, but they all missed, and then the squad that they shot at just moved. The dialing didn't really matter. It may sound like this first turn was very German focused, and honestly, we had the initiative in this turn. We were pushing forward on one flank, laying down covering fire in the middle. The Americans were reeling, but they were going to start bringing things back turn 2, turn 3. Speaking of turn 2, it gets off to a great start for the Yanks with the airplane coming in, and it is not a rookie pilot. In fact, it is a strafing run with machine guns. Now, because I was quite densely clustered on this flank, pretty much everything got pins. I think only one Fallschirmjäger squad didn't get affected by pins. Every other unit, both of the Panzer IIIs, both of the Volksgrenadier squads, and one of the Fallschirmjäger units got fully pinned up, and essentially I had to spend most of this turn just rallying on that left flank. This gave the Americans some much needed breathing room, and they started bringing over their big rifle squad and pushing forward with one of their bazooka teams, trying to get a pot shot off on the Panzer III. Unfortunately, they weren't quite in range, but if they got the first dice next turn, they would have a good chance of being able to activate and get that first bazooka shot. As for the middle, the Americans start pushing forward with the veteran squad with the SMGs and with the small squad with the LMG, and that small squad with the LMG actually does surprisingly well and is able to kill a couple of guys from my LMG squad as well as get a pin on me as well. As for my own efforts in the middle and on the right flank, they cool down a lot. I start pushing into the town myself with one of my LMG squads. This of course means I'm -1 to hit, and then the fact that a lot of the American units were on heavy cover just meant that I may have caused 1 or 2 casualties and a pin here and there, but there was no meaningful damage done by me in the middle this turn. Once again, the right flank tried a big triple bombardment. Once again, they all missed. And once again, my opponent just moved his unit afterwards. I'm starting to get the feeling that maybe the triple mortar bonanza isn't quite as good in reality as it seems on paper. But no matter, we go into turn 3, and whilst the German advance has certainly been stalled, we were able to successfully rally or stay down with a lot of our units to get rid of all the pins. So we are ready to push forward again on turn 3. However, the second American airstrike came in, and once again, the left flank is nearly entirely pinned up. The Americans are not doing a lot of damage with these airstrikes. In fact, the first one failed to damage the Panzer III, and then the second one set the Panzer III on fire, but I was able to pass my my on-fire check. But they are slowing me down greatly, and what felt like a very confident German advance on the left is just getting bogged down. To make matters worse, between the pins from the airstrike and then concentrated fire from the Americans, they are actually able to pin out one of my inexperienced squads on that left flank. I do try and use one of my Fallschirmjäger units to push forward and kill the MMG team, but I foobar, and instead I turn around and absolutely blat the Fallschirmjäger officer that was right next to them. Fortunately, my other unit of Fallschirmjäger do as they're told. They push forward and they are able to put some more fire down onto the Americans on the left flank, getting some more pins going. The middle also starts heating up for the Americans. They have got their veteran unit pushing into the town, and now they bring their Sherman through the forest, and that starts providing some covering fire as well. So there's a unit of veterans with SMGs, a small unit with an LMG, and now a Sherman, who are all pouring firepower into my 2 6-man LMG squads. Thanks to the heavy cover, I am weathering it, but my squads are getting whittled down a couple of casualties at a time. But it's not all going the Americans' way. Between my 2 LMG squads and my Marder 3 wanging those 2-inch template rounds into the town, we are also killing an American for every German we are losing. So we're just going blow for blow. And as for the right flank, well, you guys can get the gist of it by now. The mortars fire, the mortars miss, and by the time they get a chance to fire again, the American units have moved, ruining the dial-in. Definitely don't think that the triple snap 2 mortar bombardment is as good as I thought it would be. We get into turn 4 and we realize it's going to be the last turn of the game. This is because Sam and I had been having a very good chat and we hadn't really been paying attention to the time. And so we realized that we probably should get through at least 4 turns to make it a decent game. Over on the left flank, with the airstrikes now fully resolved, all of my pins removed, the offensive begins once again, and this time we are able to start doing some damage. We wipe out one of the American bazooka teams in turn 3, and we also wipe one out in this turn 4. We also, over the course of turn 3 and 4, knock out the scout car, which has been sat there immobilized, just struggling to do anything. And we're able to take out the small American squad as well. In fact, between all of the units that were killed by the end of the game, the Germans had been able to wipe out 6 of the American squads, with many of those being picked up in the first turn and the 4th turn. And I think that really goes to show the power of those American airstrikes. When used properly, they can really hold the enemy at bay. As for the Americans, sadly, they didn't get as many points, only ending up with 2 kill points. This was the German Fallschirmjäger officer that got fragged by his own guys, and then the Volksgrenadiers that they got pinned out. The thing is, there were loads of German units that were damaged. I had another one of my Volksgrenadier units that was down to just 3 guys. I had another one of my Grenadier units that were down to just a couple of the LMG gunners. But the big difference was that Simon had gone after my big units and not quite taken them out. And I had gone after Simon's little weapon teams and just concentrated on racking up those points. But I gotta be real with you guys, I didn't really care if I won or lost this game. And I don't mean that in like a horrible, arrogant kind of way. I just mean that for me, the most important part of this game was getting to play a mate, roll some dice, and see our armies battling out on the tabletop. It was a really fun game. We had tons of laughs. We had a good catch-up. Overall, the best way to start a tournament. But with one victory under the belt, it was time to get into game number 2. And this time, I got to play against my brother. So for those of you who don't know, I have a big brother called Johnny, and he also has his own YouTube channel. It's called Scholar Progenium, and it actually covers exclusively bolt action content. And this is Johnny's main game. He plays it a lot. He goes to a lot of tournaments at it. He's really, really good at it. So if you want to get some extra bolt action content and you want to watch videos about someone who actually knows what they're talking about, unlike me, then I highly recommend it. And I'll make sure there's a link to that down in the description below. Now, this game was actually really cool because Johnny and I haven't had a chance to play against each other in ages. With me being 40k focused and going to so many tournaments, and Johnny being bolt action focused and him going to a lot of tournaments, it's just been hard to match those diaries up. He's got a normal job, so obviously he can't come over midweek and do sort of battle reports, and likewise I can't go to his. And then at the weekends we just keep being at different events. So it was really good to be at the same event together. And also, it was great to actually get a chance to play against each other because it's been too long. And we actually said after this game, we were going to make sure that we played more often against each other because we both missed it. Now, Johnny's list was definitely a more refined, more focused, and more efficient German list than my own. The big feature of his army was the amount of autocannons that he was spamming in it. He had 2 heavy autocannons and he also had 2 light autocannons. And there's a lot of chit, and dare I say chat, around the bolt action water cooler about how good autocannons are this edition. But drilling down a little bit further into his list, he had overall 2 squads of veterans loaded up with assault rifles. He had 2 squads of regulars with double LMG, and it was really cool to see how we hadn't discussed it, but we both kind of noticed that the double LMG reg squad was a great way to go. He then had 2 MMG teams, 2 medium mortars, 2 of the heavy autocannon platforms. He had 2 Panzer IIs, and he had a Panzer III, same variant as mine, light armor with the medium anti-tank gun, and then he had the Nebelwerfer, the infamous Nebelwerfer, as well as having a whole bunch of officers scattered around. In total, his army had 17 order dice to my 16. Now, this was actually a really big deal because the mission we were playing, well, if I'm gonna be honest, it was kind of balked, guys. It was kind of screwed up. So, it was Breakthrough, which if you've played 2nd edition is essentially double envelopment. You're trying to get your units off the board. But the deployment was quarters, sectors. So this meant that you could deploy all of your army on one flank and try and just run it off the board, and your opponent could do the same thing, and whoever really had the most dice, you could just run off the board without even really shooting each other, like ships passing in the night, and that person with the most dice would probably win. And the issue is that because you could only deploy sort of halfway up the long table edge as part of your quarter, if that makes sense, it's very hard, especially if there's armored vehicles involved, for you to be able to put things in the way or to have units in position where they can actually see the enemy vehicles or the enemy units before they run off the board. If I'm going to be honest, I feel like this game was kind of over before it began because of the deployment and also because of the terrain. Johnny had a completely clear path off the board from one ruin to one forest, then just being off the board, and he could put any units he wanted down what was essentially my right flank, and I couldn't intercept them or stop them because there was also no reserves allowed in this mission. So it's not like I could even put things in reserve and then bring them on in that sort of right flank to try and stop my opponent. No, like literally, the only thing I could try and do is shoot them as they tried to get off the board with maybe some things in ambush, but there was a very narrow corridor for me to be able to do that. Likewise, there was also a bit of an issue with my own deployment where I believed that if I had my truck on the very edge of my deployment, I would be able to drive it straight off the board with a run turn 1 because the battle map we were playing on, and we measured all this out to make sure it was all above board, the battle map we were playing on was like 47 inches wide rather than the usual sort of 48. And then after we'd done all of our deployment and started doing our first turn, the TO came over and was like, oh, by the way, like the battle mat is meant to be like 48 inches, so count it as 48. And that meant that I couldn't drive my truck off all the way. And even if it had been 47 inches, the TO said, well, it's you've got to get the whole unit off. You can't just get the tip off. You've got to get the whole unit off. So I wouldn't have been able to drive it off anyway. So that kind of really messed up my deployment. So I had a really bad deployment because I'd based it on this sort of having this truck just yeeting itself off the board. And then also my opponent had more dice than me and there's no way me going to intercept them. It was just buggered from the beginning. In all fairness to Dan, the TO, he did just roll these missions out. It was the first 3rd edition tournament that he was running. I don't want anyone getting mean down the comment section at all because Dan, all the players gave him feedback on this mission. He took it completely on board and he said he's going to make sure that it's not randomly done. If this mission is the one that comes up, he'll make sure that it's long table edges and that reserves can be allowed, which is great. That's exactly what you want from TOs. They want to try things out, they want to push the boundaries. If some things are going to work, great. Some things aren't going to work, that's fine. We learn from it. And it's important to note, especially if you're coming in this from a 40k perspective, that there's no standard way of doing things in bot action like there is in 40k. In 40k, if you're a new TO, you can go and get the GW terrain layouts. You can use all the GW sort of terrain, sort of mission packs and everything, or you can use UKTC or DOC. You've got a smorgasbord of predetermined options for you. With bot action, when you're a TO, you've got to figure these things out for yourself. And so I have no hard feelings towards Dan or the mission or Johnny or any kind of thing that happened in this game. It was pretty much over before it began, but it was just one of the things that happens in bot action sometimes. And like I said at the beginning of the video, it's kind of a feature, not a bug in many ways. But with that said, we'll go through some of the highlights of this second game. So in round 1, my ace in the whole unit, which was my truck, which even if I had been able to get it off the board, got immobilized by a never worth a hit. So no matter what happened, that truck was never getting off the board, and that truck had been loaded up on the left flank with 4 units inside it, 2 5-band Falchion units, 2 inexperienced officers. If I'd got it off the board, that would have been like 15 points in the bank for me, which would have been great, but I was just destined for it never to happen. Between the deployment, between the ruling on the mission, and between that goddamn Neverwerfer, it wasn't to be. The good thing was that in turn 2, my triple mortar bonanza pit actually did something, and they were able to land a couple of hits on the Neverwerfer, wiping it out, which is great. This game was also another fantastic showing for the double LMG squads, because mine were able to wipe out a heavy flak autocannon in 1 turn, and then Johnny's were actually able to wipe out 1.5 of my double LMG squads over the course of the game as well. Speaking of those heavy autocannons, they are surprisingly punchy. Between that long range and the fact that they're Pen 3, one of them was actually able to destroy my Command Panzer 3, getting a penetrating hit on the front armor of it and just knocking it out. Another cool moment in the game was one of my Volksgrenadier units, which I think Johnny underestimated a little bit because they were inexperienced and he wasn't really expecting to do much, was actually able to wipe out one of his double LMG squads, which assaulted it, and then in their activation they assaulted the other double LMG squad, although admittedly it was down to like 2 guys at this point, and was able to destroy that. So 1 unit of Volksgrenadiers was able to defeat 2 units of regular Grenadiers. I will be honest though, this was a very fun maneuver that was done at the end of the game when Johnny already had it in the bag with like his 18 points, so he just had a bit of fun close assault at the end. But speaking of epic moments, this was the game where the Marder 3 decided to declare it's Marden time, and it Marded all over the enemy. In 1 turn, it was able to immobilize and set on fire the Panzer 3, and then it followed up the next turn with a double penetrating shot again and was able to double knock out the enemy Panzer 3. I have to say, over the course of this tournament, I really fell in love with the Marder 3. It's such a goofy looking vehicle with like the size of the gun in comparison to the size of the tank, and it's like really tall and all that kind of stuff. But it is one of those vehicles which you don't really expect much from it because it's quite cheap and looks a bit rubbish. But when it actually achieves something, it's really good. It's just got a lot of potential. At the end of the day, it is a big gun. It's 1 shot, but it is a big gun. And if it gets that shot off and it does something cool, then it makes it all worth it. But sadly, by the end of the game, not even It's Martin Time was able to save me. Johnny was very easily able to do a drive-by with his Panzer IIs as they went off the board, hugging that right side, going from the ruin, then behind the hill, and then driving off the board, blasting one of my infantry squads and one of my mortars along the way. That got him 6 points. Those units are getting off the board. And then all those veterans that were stacked up on that flank just basically sprinted off the board over 3 turns, getting him another 2 units off, getting him another 6 points, and then he managed to get 2 lone officers literally just running down the flank. No way I could see them, and he was able to get those 2 units off as well, meaning he got about 18 points in total. I was able to get both units of Fallschirmjäger off the board and one of my Panzers off the board, which was good. It meant that I did end up getting 9 victory points, but that was as good as it was going to get. If I had managed to get the truck and the Panzer off, I could have maybe matched Johnny on points, but the moment that it got immobilized in that first turn, one of the first shots, it basically was game over from that point. It was going to be very difficult for me to foot slog up the side of the board there with MMGs and autocannons and Panzer IIIs standing on Overwatch and just harassing me the whole way. But very well played to Johnny. He did a good job. He made sure he focused on getting his units off the board. But at the same time, we had a bit of a battle. This game genuinely could have been a completely bloodless one. Bolt action, pacifist run. But we wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of fun along the way. And so I don't think the victory was ever in doubt for him. But at least he made it an interesting game where we actually got to shoot some stuff as well. But again, I didn't really mind about winning or losing this game. I knew that I was probably going to lose it going in just because my brother just plays his game so much more than me. He knows the rules like the back of his hand. And I was just happy to play a game against him. It's been too long. With all that said, game number 2 is down. Let's now get into game number 3. Round 3 saw me playing against Alex. Now, those of you who are regular viewers of the Mordian Glory channel will recognize Alex. He does a lot of the bolt action battle reports with me, and he also is Chaos Warlord Alex in the Old World battle reports that I do. He's a damn good mate, and it was the perfect way to end what was already a very sociable tournament. And he was running something a little bit different, a nearly entirely Fallschirmjäger themed force. He had 2 units of 7 Fallschirmjäger with 6 assault rifles in each. Very, very tasty. And then he had 2 5-man units of Fallschirmjäger with 1 LMG in each of those. He also had Meat Platoon. Meat Platoon was a inexperienced officer leading 2 inexperienced Shirker squads with rifles. I love this. It's 71 points in total. That is less than a regular Panzerschreck team, and it gets you 3 dice in the bag. The problem with Meat Platoon is that it is unbelievably fragile. They're inexperienced, so they die on 3s. They've only got rifles, so they don't really do much damage out. And because they're Shirkers, they only need to take 4 pins before they break and flee off the board. But they are really cool. They're all made up of late war sort of replacement army kind of models. And it was a nice sort of counterpoint to what was otherwise quite an elite German army. Elsewhere in the list, we had a Nebelwerfer, 2 light mortars, and then there was a Panther and a Kubelwagen with a machine gun, and then 2 light scout cars with the autocannon. I believe one was the half-track, the 251, and one was the armored car, the 222. Of course, there was the usual officers leading each platoon, and there was a light autocannon flak team as well. Overall, Alex had 17 dice. The mission for round 3 was hold until relieved. That means there was 1 objective in the center of the board, and the objective marker that we had was actually provided by Alex, and it was a orange cat standing on top of a map. I absolutely love that. Deployment was you start off with half of your army on the board, and then half of your army has to go into reserve. And then, speaking of reserves, we were playing Fog of War. That means that your reserves can come on from any board edge. Now, if you're a 40k person, that might sound perfectly normal. But the thing is about action, there's no stipulation about having to stay 9 inches away or anything like that. That means that you can bring one of your units on, and then if your opponent pulls the next dice, they could bring one of their units on right next to you and shoot you in the face. It's absolute chaos, and it might sound completely balked, and in many ways it is, but this was the most fun I have ever had at any bolt action tournament, and maybe in any bolt action game, because it was just pure chaos. But I don't want to give too much away. You guys will see soon enough the hijinks that Alex and I got up to. Let's talk about deployment. On the board, I started off with pretty much all my inexperienced units, so both units of Volks Grenadiers, both inexperienced officers, and then I started with all of my mortars on the board. 2 of them were near an officer, 1 of them which is on its own on a flank. At this point I'd given up on the triple mortar bombardment bonanza, and then I also had a double LMG squad on the board. In reserve, that meant I had all of my tanks, and it meant I had my truck full of Fallschirmjäger. For Alex, he started on the board with Meat Platoon, same principle, you don't want inexperienced units off the board because they might never turn up because they're so low leadership. And then he also had the Howling Cow Neb, he had his light mortars, and he had his LMG Fallschirmjäger units and an officer. Off the board, that meant he had 2 of his assault squads, and then he had all of his armor, and then also he had the wheeled autocannon platform, because we both agreed it would be absolutely hilarious if the wheeled autocannon platform sort of just trundled onto the board at some point. With everything down or in reserve, it was time to get into the game, and like last time, I'll split things up into the left, middle, and right flanks. Turn 1, the left flank was very quiet. I fired a mortar and it missed, and then I moved one of my inexperienced units up towards the central objective. For Alex and myself, most of the action happened in the middle. Alex tried to fire his Neb, but unfortunately it didn't quite hit. I had spread out, so it was only going to be able to target 1 squad anyway. And then in return, I fired my double LMG squad at the inexperienced 2-man Neb and just wiped it out. But then Alex returned fire with his 2 LMG squads and was able to kill 1 of my guys, as well as put a couple of pins on me, and both of his light mortars started dialing into that unit. There was actually a little bit of action taking place on the right flank. This is where both armies' inexperienced units started crashing into each other. So Meat Platoon went first, and they actually were able to both pass their order checks, even with they were shirkers, and they were able to put a couple of pins and cause a couple of casualties on my Volks Grenadiers. What was kind of funny is I then realized that my Volks Grenadiers were out of range because Meat Platoon has got rifles and I've only got assault rifles. So I then pushed forward trying to return fire, but between one of the pins making me -1 to hit and me being inexperienced, I'm able to get a hit and a wound on Meat Platoon, but they do pass their 5-up cover save. We get the dice back into the bag and we go straight into turn 2. Now, for all the units that had started on the board from the beginning of the game, turn 2 is very much like turn 1. In the middle, my machine gun squads are exchanging fire with Alex's machine gun squads, and over on the right flank, Meat Platoon is engaging the Volks Grenadiers, and we're basically doing a couple of casualties to each other. But then the madness begins. I think to myself, look, it doesn't matter if I win or lose this game. I just want to feel the chaos that is Fog of War. So I bring on my first Panzer III. I bring it on right in the backfield, behind Alex's machine gun squads and behind one of his light mortars, about 2 inches away, and I fire point blank into a light mortar. I'm able to kill one of them, but Alex gets lucky on his cover saves, and he doesn't lose the whole team. Picking up what I'm putting down, Alex then passes his own reserve check and brings in his 222 armored car. He shoots my Panzer III in the side and is able to get a penetrating hit, which knocks my Panzer III out. But then I pull out the next dice of the bag and I bring in my second Panzer III. This comes in on the same edge as the 222, which is the same edge of my first Panzer III. It shoots the 222 point blank and destroys it. But then the next dice out of the bag after that is one of Alex's. He passes his order check and he brings his Panther in. Right behind my Panzer III. I think I'm in trouble here, but his Panther needing to hit me on a 3, rolls a 2 and misses. Sensing an opportunity, I roll another reserve check. I bring in my Marder 3 point blank on the side of the Panther. I'm able to get the hit. I'm able to get the double penetrating hit. Thank God for having a heavy anti-tank gun. And I blow the Panther sky high. It does a turret toss and we see Germany's first astronaut go into space. Trying to keep the crazy train going, Alex brings in his 251, or at least he tries to, but unfortunately he fails the order test this time. But first dice of turn 3, he passes the order test, brings his 251 in, and is able to immobilize my Marder. So now I can't even turn round to try and shoot the 251 in return. Skipping ahead a little bit, the 251 just sits there and on turn 4 knocks out my Marder. So in summary, we had a huge armored clash where one tank after the other came on the same flank in point blank range of each other and proceeded to try and blow each tank up. It ended up being basically a draw in terms of armored casualties. I did lose the Panzer III and the Marder 3, but Alex did lose the 222 and also the Panther. But wait, there's more! Because this was not the only chaos happening on the battlefield. Over the course of turn 2 and turn 3, Alex brought on his autocannon and also his Kübelwagen behind my mortars. This meant that they were underneath my minimum range, and over the course of those turns, both my mortars went down. And elsewhere, Alex was having some more success. You see, I had brought on my Fallschirmjäger to try and clear away Meat Platoon and to help out my Volksgrenadiers. I figured that if I was able to clear all of those units up, it would actually give me 3 units armed with like assault weapons all on the same flank, and that could allow me to start sweeping towards the middle. Part 1 of the plan went great. My Fallschirmjäger came on and they basically deleted Meat Platoon. Unfortunately, Alex then brought his Fallschirmjäger on right behind my Fallschirmjäger in point blank range and absolutely obliterated them. We worked it out and he probably should have only killed like 2 or 3 of them just because of the innate toughness of Fallschirmjäger, but he got like 6 hits on one squad and then rolled 5 ups and killed one squad and then repeated the exact same thing on the other unit. But that's the way it goes. Sometimes the dice giveth, sometimes the dice taketh away. The only saving grace was that all of this happened essentially over the course of turn 2 and turn 3. And it meant that Alex's units were quite badly out of position. You see, I had my unit of Volksgrenadiers, the ones that I started on the board, just chilling behind a ruin in the middle of the board, holding the objective. And so what happened over the course of turn 4 was essentially Alex had to sprint on 2 of his units onto the middle objective and hope that I couldn't kill him off it. Because, again, we've been having a bit of a social, bit of a chinwag, we'd only got to turn 4, it meant that if I was able to kill him off that middle objective, then I was going to be able to win that game. However, despite my best efforts, one of my double LMG squads never came on the board, which would have been some much needed firepower, and a lot of my own units were kind of out of position as well, so I was not able to bring enough firepower to bear. I was able to wipe out one of the 3-man Fallschirmjäger squads, but a full 7-man assault squad got onto the objective, and that meant that it was contested between my Volksgrenadiers and his Fallschirmjäger. As a result, Game 3 ended in a draw, with neither side being able to fully claim the central objective and it remaining contested. And I just have to say, I had an absolute blast with this game. It was just so silly. I think sometimes Bolt Action can be perceived as quite a sensible game because it's historical and not sci-fi or fantasy. But the reality is that it can be as serious or as silly and wacky as you want it to be. There were some people that played this mission at the event and it was very serious, very back and forth. And then there were people like Alex and I who were just like, well, if you bring your tank on there, I'm going to bring my tank on there. Well, if you bring your tank on there, I'm going to bring my tank on there. And it just evolved into hilarity and madness. There was loads of final silly moments in that final turn as well. Alex charged one of his inexperienced officers into my mortar team, and my mortar team had already taken a casualty, and we both killed each other because we strike at the same time on open ground. And there was a similar situation that happened with his autocannon team where one of my officers charged in and killed one of the 2 remaining crewmen and then died. And the other officer charged in, killed one of the 2 remaining crewmen and then died. So all these mad assaults happening with inexperienced units charging like regular units and basically them killing each other out. In fact, to give you an idea of how lethal this game actually ended up being, Alex lost a total of 9 out of 17 units, and I lost a total of 11 out of 16 units. So between us, we actually lost 20 units. Admittedly, a lot of those were things like mortars and stuff, but still, I lost a Fallschirmjäger, Alex lost a big squad as well. It was a hyper-lethal game, and I think a big part of that was just being able to counter-reserve each other so effectively. If I was going to be sensible about this and maybe not embrace the chaos, it is kind of crazy that you can just come in and start like blatting people, but you can absolutely play around that. Alex and I had almost no meaningful transports in this game. I had like a truck, which I think failed to turn up. If we'd had a bit more mechanized things like Hanomags and stuff, I actually think that it would have been a lot less lethal because we couldn't have had infantry squads coming in and then getting counter deployed and all that kind of stuff. So it does seem crazy, but before you all write it off as a bonkers mission that you should never play, there are absolutely ways to prepare for it. And some of the more mechanized armies in the tournament had no problem handling this mission. But with the end of round 3, we get to the end of the tournament, and somehow I'd managed a cheeky 1 win, 1 loss, and 1 draw, which was far ahead anything I expected. And to be honest, I wasn't too worried about the wins and losses. As I've said throughout this entire video, I was just so happy to be playing a Bolt Action tournament. This is fast becoming one of my favorite games. It's just fun, and it can be silly, and it can be sensible, and it can be tactical, and it can just be balmy, and it's just a great game overall. And it was really a big social event for me. I got to meet a few people I hadn't seen a few times. I got to have some great conversations. And I think that is kind of reflected in the fact that every single one of my games basically ended around turn 4 or turn 5. And I'm just not worried about that. Normally I agonize over not finishing a game, but this time it didn't really make a big difference. And everyone that I was chatting to was chatting back to me as well. It was just a great social event, and I think we were all glad to get it in before the end of the year. If I was to draw any lessons learned from this, I think that assault rifle veteran squads are really good. I think that double LMG regular squads are bloody fantastic. I think the triple mortar bonanza pit is rubbish. I will not be taking that again. I think the nebs are powerful, but so many people are kind of prepared for them now that you can take them out fairly easily, especially when people are running them inexperienced. And I think that the Panzer III with the light armor and the medium AT gun is really, really good bang for buck. If there's anything that I would change about my list, I probably would remove the jank from it, remove the triple mortar. The jankiest thing in there was the thing that did the worst. And I had a good chat with my brother, Scholar Progenium, who obviously plays this game a lot more than me, and he's sort of coined this phrase like mixed bag list. I don't know if he's picked up from somewhere or it's something he's come up with, but he said that mixed bag lists, what I'd probably call a take all comers list with no jank, no skew, just bread and butter, and just focusing on building a nice solid all-round list. He said that he's found those to be the most effective. And actually looking at the list that did best at the event, they were all ones that at most had a tiny bit of jank, a tiny bit of skew in there, but the vast majority of the ones that did well, that placed sort of first, second, and third, were ones that had lots of tools in the toolbox. And the lists that did worse were ones like mine, or some other ones that were even more heavily skewed than mine, where people had gone, oh yeah, well, I can take like 5 of this now, so surely that's overpowered. And then when they tried it, they just found that it just didn't work. This is very anecdotal evidence, and of course this is a very local meta, but that does give me hope, because there was a lot of concerned people who play bot action that thought 3rd edition was going to cause it to become a jank fest. And my experience so far is you are much better off not going for a skew list, and you're much better off going for a take all comers mixed bag army. Oh, and of course the best bit about the event was the Marder 3 going, it's Marding time, and then Marding all over a Panther and a Panzer III. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Did you enjoy this after action report? What was your favorite bit and why was it the Marder 3? And all feedback is welcome. Ways that you think I can improve my list and my tactics. And also let me know what faction you want me to take to the next tournament. We've had Brits at a tournament now. We've had Germans at a tournament. Maybe next it'll be Soviets, but I've also got my Japanese and my Americans. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and like and subscribe. I know it's a little cringe asking for those kind of things, guys, but especially with bot action content, we need all of the boost that we can get with the old YouTube algorithm. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously, guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.